Pull trigger.
Welcome back to the channel, you guys. Welcome back to the boat gang. We got Miss Geico 24 on the block, Project Zippy. Okay. Today we're actually going to be installing a 36 millimeter adjustable motor mount in the Zippy. Okay. And a stuffing tube with the Speedmaster strut, the whole nine. Okay. Stick around. Big B. Wood Ironclad RC. To catch you guys up, okay, this is part 4. In part 1, 2, and 3 we actually did this the strut install the base, okay, the rudder install, and pulled the stuffing tube. You're caught up, you're welcome. Okay, like I said, we're going to be installing the motor mount. The reason I'm installing a motor mount in the boat is because the electronics tray busted out. Okay, it was loose. I probably could have glued it back down and it would have been fine. Since it was out, I went ahead and did the carbon fiber inlay. Okay, I have videos in my library showing you guys how to do an inlay if you're interested. I just did the tunnel area on this to kind of keep weight down and material cost down. On my sponsons, I actually reinforced my whole sponson from the very tip, chopped up fiberglass and epoxy, basically on a paintbrush, painted it from basically the seam all the way to the tunnel. All that's basically got one pretty thick application of somewhat soupy fiberglass and epoxy. Basically painted all in there, took big clumps of fiberglass on the inside corner right here. I had bad experience with my Blackjack 24. It basically split right here on both sides. I've got it fixed, super glue, epoxy chopped up fiberglass. So I basically was just trying to prevent that from happening with this boat, because we're going to be running on 6S, you know what I mean? So I tried to ironclad the boat out but keep it light at the same time. You know, I don't want no heavy boat. Light boat's fast boat. You know what I'm saying? You know what I'm saying? Yeah, you know what I'm saying. Okay, for this upgrade, for this install, we're going to be using this Speedmaster style strut. It actually comes with a 3/16 bearing, okay? And you'll need a 1/4 inch brass stuffing tube. Thin walled brass stuffing tube, okay? Make sure it's the hard brass, not the bendable brass. Okay, so basically with the Speedmaster style struts, your 1/4 inch stuffing tube fits in the strut barrel. It goes all the way through the strut barrel. Okay, then this bushing right here, bearing, basically rides in the stuffing tube. It's supported by the stuffing tube. It's a really great design. I love these Speedmaster struts, Speedmaster bushings. You could use these bushings in so many different applications. It's kind of crazy, but it's a great design. Okay, so that's basically going to get a bend put in it so we can fit it in our application. We're actually going to be using this 3/16 stub shaft with a 0.150 flex cable. Left hand counterclockwise spinning flex cable to match our counterclockwise spinning propellers. Okay, we'll also have a Teflon liner that gets installed later on. Okay, I have a 0.150 flex cable coupler. Okay, 0.150 to 5 millimeter for our motor. Okay, so I got the boat sitting flat on the tabletop. Okay, with my strut flat as well. Neutral strut position. Okay, so we're basically gonna put our stuffing tube through the hull and get this stuffing tube bent to meet up with the strut in this initial position. We'll start with a neutral trim and then we'll tune the boat as needed. Okay, this is a good starting point basically for any catamaran. Okay, so our through hole's right here, and we need the stuffing tube basically most of our bends are going to be in the through hole area right here, which is going to be kind of tough. I noticed that this through hole is really low on this boat, which is actually pretty cool because it'll be basically flat to the strut. It won't have a bunch of bend in it, so that's actually, I'm thinking that might be good. So I took a 1/4-inch drill bit, drilled out my through hole so I could fit my stuffing tube in the boat. Okay, and we're gonna basically be mounting the motor to mount up to our stuffing tube. Okay, so basically our strut's gonna be right here, basically like that. Our stuffing tube is gonna be all the way to the back of the strut, so we need to keep that in mind when we're making our bends. Okay, there's a lot of stuff to consider here, you know, where your bend's going to be at, where it meets up to the motor, where it goes into the strut, if we're going to need to cut some off inside or outside the boat. So you got to do a lot of measuring, a lot of figuring, a lot of thinking on this part. There's going to be a lot of back and forth, you know. Okay, so that looks about right. So I'm basically going to mark where my stuffing tube is going to go through the hole, and we're going to start bending. Okay, this is the part I get a lot of questions. You know, it really depends on what kind of brass you have. You know, some brass will bend bend easy. Some brass you need to heat it up. Some, if you go to bend it, it'll actually snap off. So this is actually there's so many different ways to do it. You know, they actually have pipe bending springs that you can put on over the tube so it don't kink off in areas. I just kind of bend it by hand, you know, so I'm gonna kind of slowly bend it. And it's always nice to have an extra one laying around in case you mess up, you know. That's where our through hole is going to be. I know I'm going to need a slight bend right here. With this bushing right here, we don't want to put any kind of bends back here. Okay, so we don't want to bend this tube at all back here because that'll put unwanted pressure on our bushing. I was using it for a cap. So all our bending is basically going to be from here forward. Alright, so I got everything worked out. I'm trying to do the best I can with the camera angle, so kind of bear with me here. Notice my strut sitting flat. Okay, so I'm actually going to push the boat down. Alright, and my strut's sitting flat, the sponsons are flat, and my stuffing tube is basically parallel to the ride surface. Okay, horizontal. Alright. Most of the bend is actually basically from here on the stuffing tube, basically from here to here. That's basically where I put my bend at, about right in there. Make sure you got it bent right. You know, that, like I said, this section right here, it really don't need no bends in it. Alright, so the angle on the inside actually looks pretty good to the motor. We won't know until we actually cut our stuffing tube. I got my stuffing tube cut. Okay, and I'm gonna run about 10 millimeter gap from the end of my stuffing tube to the coupler. Okay, just enough gap I can unscrew my coupler to take my cable in and out. Okay, about that much, 5 to 10 millimeters. Any more than that, you stand a chance of spinning the cable because there's a huge gap right there. So make sure you have a small gap. Alright, so now we need to epoxy this into the boat. Basically, I'm going to pull this thing out, okay, and I'm going to sand the stuffing tube so it kind of roughs it up so we get a good adhesion with the epoxy. Okay, I have it marked exactly where it's going to be at, so once we mix the epoxy, we put the stuffing tube through the hole, it'll be easy to find where we're going to be at, you know. I need to actually fill quite a bit of area, like a little void that I made, because I actually ended up raising the stuffing tube up a couple mil, if that. You see the gap in the bottom, so I need to make sure that this bottom area is full of epoxy. Okay, so I'll probably just kind of pour it in there, you know what I mean? So alright, gonna be using some Bob Smith 15 minute here. I'm just gonna mix it up 50-50 ratio. I'm gonna use some modeling clay. Just put some modeling clay in my stuffing tube, and that should prevent epoxy from getting in there. Don't waste your epoxy because it don't take much at all. I would say, shoot, on a boat like this, probably 1.5 grams should do it, you know. Yeah, I'm gonna go 75 and 75. Drizzle some epoxy in this through hole right here, you know, just kind of get it dripped in there, get a nice thick application, you know. Just gonna kind of wet out the brass stuffing tube. Sorry about the camera angle, gotta work quick. Just gonna kind of wet out the stuffing tube where it's gonna go through the hole. All right, and I'm going to push it through. You see where I put that modeling clay? See how it's not going in my stuffing tube? Alright, so I'm just going to kind of work my stuffing tube back and forth. Make sure I got that epoxy everywhere in there so we get a good seal. Push it all the way up to our line, our mark. Okay. Put our strut on so we know it's lined up with the bracket back here. Okay, so as it's curing out, we'll actually have our strut on, and we're going to make sure the inside of the stuffing tube is going to be set up so that it lines up perfect to our motor later on, which mine looks pretty good. So the most important part is make sure your motor stuffing tube lines up. Actually, if your stuffing tube's wanting to move around in there, put your flex cable in so that the flex cable will hold your stuffing tube in place. Okay, push the cable in the motor coupler, in the motor collet, and that'll actually hold everything in place for you. Okay, so I'm gonna finalize mine. I'm gonna kind of manicure the epoxy, make sure everything's sealed up good. Take your time. As you can see, I've got that through hole basically filled with epoxy. Okay, going to use some alcohol, just some rubbing alcohol on a rag, and clean up this excess. And I'm actually going to let it drip, basically drip out the through hole. Okay, and then we'll sand it to shape later on. Okay, I usually don't spend too much time on this. I mean, I get the bend right, the epoxy, you know, just make sure it's sealed up. It's not rocket science, you know. While this is kicking off, okay, I'm gonna go ahead and prep everything up for my motor mount. Okay, I'm gonna use some 40 grit right here and rough up our inlay. Okay, so That should be good. I actually grinded all my epoxy dam holes off of this mount, so we're actually going to lay epoxy on the bottom, and we're basically going to run epoxy over the top to kind of lock it down in place. You know what I mean? So before we lay any epoxy out, we need to wipe everything up with alcohol. That's very, very important. Clean and rough up your work area. Okay. So that's ready. Get this wiped down. I'm gonna go 3 grams. Actually, let's do 2. I'm gonna do a gram of hardener, a gram of resin. Actually, we'll do 240 total. 240. Okay. What I like to do is put epoxy on my mount. Get epoxy on there pretty good. Okay. Then you can put the mount in the boat with that epoxy on it, and it'll kind of tell you, put your shaft in your coupler. Okay, get it lined up. That epoxy will basically tell you where you need to put epoxy at. You guys see that? See how it left an imprint there? Alright. Okay, so I actually did 2 applications of just epoxy. I was going to use some carbon fiber chopped up in the epoxy, but I decided not to. I went 2 applications. My motor mount's perfectly lined up. Okay, I got my bushing in my stuffing tube. Make sure that the stuffing tube's right at the end of the strut, which it is. Bushing's in. The Teflon liner's in. Basically now all we gotta do is cut the cable to size. Okay, we just cut this end of the cable, make sure our drive dog gets butted up to the bushing right there, a little 2mm gap. Basically the flat spot goes here, and we've cut the cable. Boom, we're done. So the next part of the video series, we'll be installing the servo mount and the battery trays. Okay, so thanks for watching. We'll see you guys next time. Project Zippy.